Well, let's look at something which isn't going to confuse us at all today. Yeah, right. I'm Jonathan Downey, and this is Inside Interpreting. And today we're going to look at interpreting settings. This is another video in my series, my short video series, on basic theoretical concepts. We all know about interpreting settings, don't we? You have cohort interpreting and simultaneous interpreting, conference interpreting, I think. Okay, so let me start again. You have cohort interpreting, you have conference interpreting, you have medical interpreting, you have business interpreting. We've got that. Okay, is public service interpreting a setting or not? Because it could cover medical interpreting, asylum interpreting, which kind of sounds like a bit of legal interpreting, or is it? And then legal interpreting, does that just cover working for the police? Or does that cover like advocacy visits with lawyers? What does that even cover? Conference interpreting, okay, great, we've got that. But is a medical conference part of conference interpreting or part of medical interpreting? And a legal conference, is that legal interpreting or conference interpreting? It's certainly not public service interpreting, but the reality is you could be employed by a public service organisation to do conference interpreting on something legal. So what is that? And then, as if that wasn't confusing enough, we realise that in terms of empirical results, the differences between the settings are kind of meh. Simple, for example, to show you why I go meh at the differences between settings. For ages, people have known that in dialogue interpreting settings, in community and public service interpreting, no, I don't know the difference between them either. Interpreters have been very active and involved, and interpreters play a really visible role in events. I've talked about interpreters being gatekeepers, talked about interpreters being coordinators, even interpreters sometimes being filters. I know that's controversial. And everyone thought, well, that's just like a community interpreting, public service interpreting thing. Conference interpreters would never, ever do that. We are neutral. We are just in the booth. No. Morvan Beaton, and then you have Claudia Monicelli, both found examples where conference interpreters indulged in exactly the same kind of behaviours as we had grown used to seeing in sign language interpreting, community interpreting, public service interpreting. Doing the filtering, being a visible part of things. Ebru Deriker even found conference interpreters changing pronouns and advising speakers on how to speak more effectively, how to work with interpreters better. Ebru Deriker even found interpreters in their output deliberately disowning certain content for the good of their own professional reputation. Maybe they're bad interpreters, maybe. But these are all professionals, members of good associations, in some cases, interpreters for international institutions. If they're bad, then we're probably all bad. Now, I know every interpreter is going to say they don't indulge in that behaviour. Every interpreter tells me that they're neutral and impartial until they read the research and go reflect on their own practice. But anyway, so any differences that we find between different settings of interpreting seem to melt away as soon as you do research looking for those same features elsewhere. Anything we find in sign language interpreting, we find a version of in spoken language interpreting. Anything we find in community interpreting, eventually we find in conference interpreting, perhaps under a different form, but the same things happening. So what is the difference between interpreting settings? Are there any real differences that we need to think about or worry about? Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. But certainly from now we need to be very careful and very aware when we're dividing up the world of interpreting into separate settings. I'm Jonathan Downey, and this is Inside Interpreting.